who will have more receiving production per game this season, Colston Loveland or Roman Wilson? Now, I want to camp out with Jacob's question for a little bit because got the wheels turning a little bit even more. Who is Michigan's number one wide receiver or number one passing game option going to be this year? You have Colston Loveland in there. You have Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, who I often get teased about for writing him off and saying that he should have been benched at times last year for Andrew Anthony. Well, of course, history made me look like an ass on that one. But yeah, I want to start out there, Clayton. I mean, when you look at who's going to have the most receiving production per game, we'll start with Jacob's question and maybe spin it off into the topic of conversation about the passing game in general. Who is that guy? Is it Colston Loveland or is it Roman Wilson?
Yeah, well, my answer has to do with both the number one wide receiver or receiver question and Jacob's question, because I've been saying this for a few months now, and it's not necessarily going out on a limb, but I've been kind of banging this drum that I think Roman Wilson is going to lead the team in receiving production. I just think, to me, progression's not always linear. Cornelius Johnson has been that guy where he led the team in receiving in 2021 when Ronnie Bell went down. He was second in 2020. He was second last season. He's been really steady. But to me, Roman Wilson has kind of that extra gear. I like his speed. I like his route running. And from what we've heard behind the scenes, too, this offseason, not that he was immature in the past, but he's just become that much more mature. He's become that much more of a leader. I was talking to Fred Moore, Michigan's freshman wide receiver who enrolled early in January last week, and he said that Roman is one of those guys that's taken everybody under their wing now, that he's taken things extremely seriously and that he's a student of the game. I see that in Roman Wilson. I think he's going to lead this team in receiving, so I'm going to go with him over Colston Loveland. I would probably place Colston Loveland as high as I am on him, probably at third behind Cornelius Johnson. As much as I say he's just steady and kind of is what he is at this point, that's pretty good. That's pretty solid. So I think he's going to be second. This is barring injury on everybody, which is an important factor. Roman has to stay healthy. He's battled injuries in the middle of the season 2 years in a row, so he's got to stay on the field. But I'm pretty confident in him having more upside. I did an article earlier in the offseason for our magazine on yards per snap and yards per target. Roman Wilson, one of the best on the team there last season. So I think as he gets more opportunity with Ronnie Bell no longer on the roster, it's going to be Roman Wilson. But Cornelius Johnson will be right up there. Colston Loveland, I like what he can do. And I know we have another question, too, about where Donovan Edwards stands. He's going to be heavily involved in the pass game as well.
A couple of super chats to clean up here from our buddy Shane Johnson. Says it's 1A, 1B, however you want to slice it with Roman and Cornelius Johnson. And I think as it pertains to those two guys at that position, I do think it'll kind of be one guy, maybe not as featured one week, but one guy is going to find himself more opportunities than the other just based on how the game plan goes.
Yeah.
Now you have a guy like Roman Wilson, who I think early on in the year last year, they did a really nice job of getting him the ball in space. I think it was three of his first four or four of his first five offensive touches of the year went for touchdowns. They used him a little bit, as a not a change of pace back, but he got some carries out of the backfield. He was a guy. I think he scored one on a reverse. Obviously, he's got the playmaking ability to be a guy that you kind of can be a matchup guy and you move him all around the field. And I think that to a certain extent, like you're not going to have this guy in the backfield, but I think that Colston Loveland breaking out also has some of that flex potential where, you can play him in line. You can play him in the slot. He's going to play a little bit of boundary receiver. That's actually probably what he's most comfortable with at this point in time, given the fact that he was a receiver in high school. So, I think Cornelius Johnson's probably more of your traditional guy. I wouldn't be surprised to see him. They just need him to be a little more consistent. He can't have those weeks where he has 6 or 7 catches and then you don't see him for 4 weeks. I think for him being the elder statesman in that room, and I think that the fact that Ronnie Bell's not there and the fact that he is just another year older, I think that he will be a little more relied upon to be a more consistent guy. Go to this one from Schaub Fam for $2 who says, saw an article recently about Darius Clemens looking built. And he also follows it up by saying, Tyler Morris or Darius Clemens as wide receiver 3. Now, that could mean a lot of different things, but let's just lay out the case for both of them and what they can bring to the table. So we'll start with Tyler Morris. What do you like with what he can bring to this Michigan offense, Clayton?
Well, that's a great question by Schaub fam too, because I think that's more the bigger question here when it comes to the wide receiver core. We kind of know what Roman Wilson is. Again, I think he's going to take a big step. We know what Cornelius Johnson is. Colston Loveland, we're going to see him progress as a tight end. I like AJ Barner as well. I feel like he doesn't get talked about enough in this equation. But that third wide receiver, is going to be important. I would say who you would call the wide receiver 3 would probably be Tyler Morris, and that depends a lot on the position that he plays. I think he's a true slot receiver. I know he can move around. I know Ron Bellamy and the whole offensive staff, they move those guys around. But Tyler Morris, to me, has those kind of chops where he could be in there on big downs. We saw it, that picture that just popped up on the screen. That was a huge first down when the game was still in doubt at Rutgers last season. Ran a great route right to the sticks. So I like Tyler Morris there. Darius Clemens, a little bit of a different element that he can add. Maybe the deep ball. Maybe he's a little bit faster on a straight line. He does look huge, absolutely massive. Kind of looks like a linebacker in some of the pictures that Michigan football posted on social media recently. So we'll be interested to see when he gets his opportunity what he can do. We saw him a little bit last season. Same with Tyler Morris, and they didn't get the targets maybe that some people thought they would. And I know Darius was super highly touted coming out of high school. I still think he has a really bright future, but for me this fall, I'm going Tyler Morris, just given that he's more of a slot. That's kind of what they need. And I liked what I saw towards the end of last season when he got some more opportunity.
Yeah, and there's a couple different ways you can look at that term, right? Like what is a wide receiver 3? I would choose to believe that it is, when they go to those 3 wide receiver sets, that's your third wide receiver that's on the field. So
yeah.
Would Tyler Morris be the most productive of those next couple of guys? I don't know, because it comes down to opportunity and his relationship with the quarterback. But yeah, when you look at this passing game in general, not that Ronnie Bell was this go-to like Biletnikoff, award caliber type of guy, but I just feel like it's, we talked a couple weeks ago to Jim Harbaugh, and he talks about how there's a lot of mouths to feed. I don't think there's going to be a situation this year where, last year we're saying, Andrel Anthony needs to get on the field more, or they need to throw the ball more down the field to Nico Collins, like from a couple of years ago. I really do think it's going to be based on, just spreading the ball around and taking what the defense gives you. Because I don't know that there's that. Is there an all Big Ten caliber receiver on this roster? Yeah, sure, maybe on the third or fourth teams. But, we know those Ohio State guys are going to put up big numbers. We know there are some other guys in the Big Ten that'll probably get the ball a little bit more. So, it's just so hard to predict what those stat lines are going to look like at the end of the year. So, I mean, for you, Clayton, as we kind of move into, some of the other segments, I want to close out this chat about the skill position guys, and then we'll talk about Donovan Edwards and what he can bring to this wide receiver room. But, gun to your head right now, who is that guy that is going to, most receptions, most yards, most touchdowns? Those could very easily be 3 very different guys. So maybe let's just run through each. In terms of total receptions, who would be your pick for that?
I'm gonna go with Roman Wilson and stick there. I like what he can do in the quick game. I know that there's where you can kind of rack up some receptions. I know you mentioned that last year in the beginning of the season seemed like they were kind of using him more, a lot of that quicker stuff, shorter routes. I think he can be used there, but I think as we've seen throughout his career in more limited action, he can be used down the field as well. So I'm gonna go Roman Wilson there, but it could be different between those 3 categories, and I'll have him for yards as well.
Okay, so you have him for yards.
What do you have
for receptions? I'm going to go with Colston Loveland. I could see him catching, 50 to 60 passes, but it's not. I don't think it would be for big yardage, although he does have the big playability. So I'll go Loveland for receptions. Yards, I think I agree with you. I'd go with Wilson.
Big playability.
The most interesting one is touchdowns. I mean, who is? Because again, this is a program that the record for most touchdown passes in a year is still 25. So, and us talking about them spreading the ball around, it could just come in a variety of different ways. And I'm interested in who you think would lead from a touchdown perspective.
It's a tough one. I could see it, in a couple of, as you mentioned too earlier. I mean, Roman Wilson had a rushing touchdown against TCU. He had a rushing touchdown earlier on in the season, so those were two of his touchdowns. So maybe they won't necessarily come as receptions. I could see it being a Cornelius Johnson. I could see it being Colston Loveland. I could see it being AJ Barner. Colston Loveland might be the better tight end as a receiver, but AJ Barner, I think in the red zone could be a little bit more of a mismatch just with his size and his strength. So I think it's a number of those guys, are right in the mix. I don't know. I'll just stick with Roman Wilson across the board. I just think it's easier if I think he's going to lead the team in catches and receiving yards, I think it's an easier bet to just stick with him with touchdowns. But I think they'll be close together. And as you mentioned too, with only 25 touchdowns passes being the record. I mean, look at it last season. Ronnie Bell had 4. Cornelius had 6. 2 of those against Ohio State. Schoonmaker with 3. Roman Wilson with 4. Colston Loveland and Donovan Edwards with 2. I mean, there were a lot of guys with just a few or a handful. So I think it's going to be really close. It could depend on a big game like Ohio State, like it did for Cornelius last season.
It's weird too, because normally when you look at a lot of these offenses and these guys that have, lead their teams in touchdown receptions, usually those are guys that are getting the ball, down in jump ball, contested jump ball situations too. Whereas when Michigan gets down in the red zone or down to the 4, 3, 1 yard line, whatever it winds up being, they're handing the ball off to their backs too. So it's tough to predict. I think I would probably go with, I think Roman Wilson's a good fit because I think if they're going to score touchdowns through the air, it's probably going to be because they were pretty explosive in doing so.